Our first reading this morning was written by the human right. There's a deep hidden sigh of our neighbor become our own. When it is necessary to drink so much pain, when a river of anguish drowns us, when we have wept many tears, and they flow like rivers from our sad eyes, only then does the deep hidden sigh of our neighbor become our own. Our scripture reading this morning comes from Psalm 23, and this version is from the Women's Lectionary for the Whole Church by Will Gaffney. She who birthed the earth is my shepherd. I shall not want. In green pastures she makes me lie down. My soul she restores. She leads me in right paths for her name's sake. Yea, even though I walk through the shadow valley death, I do not fear evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare before me a table in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and loving kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of she who is faithful for days without end. We are all too familiar with walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Here in Philly, all you have to do is walk past the Unitarian Society of Germantown on Lincoln Drive today to see the display of T-shirts represented those killed by gun violence this year alone. Some don't need a display of T-shirts to remind them of the city's violence. For too many, it's the blast of bullets heard from your own home or your own school, places where you should feel safe. Or Death Valley is the violence that comes from legislative attacks on trans and gender nonconforming people that leads to both discrimination and physical acts of harm. Beyond the local section of the newspaper, the horrific humanitarian consequences of war that's happening in Gaza and Israel are too heart-wrenching to bear. Yet some of us feel called to do just that, to bear witness, to pay attention, and to speak out and remind each other that God is always on the side of the oppressed. This is a time to see humanity in all those who are suffering, no matter their faith or politics or the complex history of a place. People matter more than any of those other factors, and what is unfolding surely is the valley of the shadow of death, and we do fear evil. When you are in distress, needing help, and needing to figure out what to do with your big feelings, one of the best places to turn is the book of Psalms. Defining a psalm is difficult primarily because the content of the book of Psalms is so diverse. It's a collection of Israel's poems, prayers, and litanies. 150 compositions make up the book. Some are responsive readings. Many relate to music. And even the words on the page are formatted differently as part of the poetic expression. The Psalms are like a really good playlist where there has been intentional editorial shaping to organize the entire collection. Hermann Gunkel, an early 20th century German biblical scholar, set out to classify all of the Psalms. No scholar has influenced the modern study of the book as much as Gunkel. His pioneering form-critical work sought to provide a new and meaningful context in which to interpret individual psalms, not by looking at their historical background or their literary context, but by bringing together psalms of the same genre from throughout the Psalter. Even though scholarship on the Psalms has refined and critiqued his work and moved on to some different approaches, Gunkel's classifications remain firmly entrenched and is the default starting point for most studies of the collection. According to Gunkel, for psalms to be considered as part of the same genre, 3 conditions have to be met. The psalms have to have a similar setting in life or basis in worship. They had to be characterized by common thoughts, feelings, and moods, and they required a shared diction, style, and structure in their form. These features provide the signals of a particular genre. Working with these criteria, Gunkel isolated a number of different genres or types of psalms, In his earlier work, he highlighted 4 primary types of psalms: hymns, community laments or complaints, thanksgiving psalms, and individual laments, with various subcategories and some psalms having a mixture of the different forms. In his later work, he identified 2 additional types, expanding to 6 major types, when he added enthronement psalms and royal psalms. Let's go on a brief theological journey together as we review the different features that make up the genres on the playlist. Hymns in general are a call to praise, sing, and rejoice to Yahweh in some form, and usually provide reasons why Yahweh should be praised. Hymns were sung as part of worship on diverse occasions, including sacred festivals, perhaps by a choir or an individual singer. The second genre is enthronement psalms. They often begin with the words, "Yahweh has become king." They contain many calls to rejoice and present the idea that a new world kingdom is coming. The third genre is called communal complaint psalms. Typically, they call upon Yahweh by name. They contain lamenting complaints over misfortune and are almost always political in nature. We find petitions to Yahweh to transform the misfortunes. The aim is to excite confidence or to move Yahweh to action. The setting of these psalms are days of national fasting and/or complaint festivals brought on by various national calamities such as war, exile, pestilence, drought, famine, and plagues. Next, we have individual complaint psalms. They typically contain the following elements, but not always in the same order. There's a summons to Yahweh, the complaint or lament itself, considerations inducing Yahweh to intervene, including challenging Yahweh's honor, exciting anger by citing the enemy's words, or by the nature of the complaint itself. But the main part is a petition or entreaty, which is the complaint psalm. It may be of a general nature, or it might be quite specific, like a confessional petition, a petition of innocence, psalms of cursing and vengeance, or a psalm of trust, which is the genre of our lectionary today, the beloved 23rd Psalm. Finally, you may get a conviction of being heard or a vow. These psalms were occasioned by life-threatening situations rather than everyday life, such as situations including illness, misfortune, persecution from enemies. Though, as in most cases in the Bible, one needs to be careful about taking the images too literally. The fifth genre we have are royal psalms. There are different types, though in all cases they are concerned entirely with kings. Some of their distinguishing elements include praises to the king, affirmation of Yahweh's favor to the king, prayers for the king and other royal oracles, portrayals of the king's righteousness and piety. These psalms were performed at some of the court festivals in the presence of the king and his dignitaries. Finally, we have thanksgiving psalms of the individual or the community. They begin with an expanded introduction declaring the intention to thank God. Then we get the narration of the trouble, usually to the guests of the celebration. The psalmist usually recounts their trouble, their calling upon God, and their deliverance. Finally, we get an acknowledgement or proclamation of Yahweh's deliverance, usually directed towards others, and in many cases, the psalm ends with an announcement of the thank offering. It is clear that these psalms were intended to be used in a cultic setting. It is thought that the individual in the presence of the worshiping congregation would testify personally to God's saving deeds, accompanying with a ritual act and meal. Eventually, these psalms freed themselves from the actual sacrifice part of things. Thanks for coming with me on that scholarly journey. Your seminary certificate is in the mail. And by the way, that was all introduction. Given the state of things, I find it interesting that the lectionary psalm for today turned out to be Psalm 23, categorized as a psalm of trust. These psalms reformulate the lament psalms and shift their focus to an expression of trust and confidence, so much so that often the complaint or petition itself is displaced. Well, my psalm of confession today is that I'm in no mood for a psalm of trust and confidence, given the state of things. Instead, I want a communal complaint to be on the menu. If you don't want me to implicate you because maybe you're more ready than I am today to turn to comfort and trust, then I'll take accountability for an individual lament. I'll take a psalm protesting innocence, or please even give me a psalm of cursing and vengeance. No, today give me Psalm 88, which starts off with, I am overwhelmed with troubles and my life draws me near to death. And unlike a lot of the other Psalms, it never makes a turn towards anything else. It goes on to conclude this way, from my youth I have suffered and been close to death. I have borne your terrors and am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me, your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood, they have completely engulfed me. You have taken from me friend and neighbor, darkness is my closest friend. Instead, Psalm 23 is what we get, and it says that we are to want nothing. And the divine makes us lie down. Theologian and author Cole Arthur Riley responds to this psalm this way. What a peculiar answer to the valley of the shadow of death. You might expect God's response to be to have people rise, to empower them to fight. But God's answer is an unapologetic care for the body. What does it mean that in response to the terrors of the world, God would have us lie down, to eat, to drink from still waters? Are we really expected to fear no evil and be comforted by a shepherd's tool of command and control, as if our empty cups are evidence that we've failed some kind of spiritual test? Psalm 23 may not be what I want, but it's what's being served today, and I am hungry. I am longing for a word on high to make sense of all this mess, and the truth is my faith feels too untidy to clean it up. But she who birthed the earth, she who is my shepherd, probably knows better than I do about what's best for me today. So I will try to swallow this nourishment down, the only way that I know how, to accept it as an invitation to look around, to see who else needs rest and how I might offer it, whose soul needs to be restored even more than mine. Who can I anoint with oil, and what does that look like? Can you prepare a meal for someone to distract them from all that is working against them? Whose cup seems far from overflowing? And how can you be the loving kindness that shows up just when they feel like they can't take another step? If they are too steeped in lament and complaint and can't yet turn to trusting God, maybe they have just enough fortitude not to protest against a little comfort from you, the ambassador of the divine. We can only hope that your hospitality and care can hold them over until they have reasons to sing a psalm of victory, to shout words of thanksgiving, until they can belt out a psalm like Psalm 18 that says, I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer, my God in whom I take refuge, my shield, and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call upon you who is worthy to be praised, as I shall be saved from my enemies. May you soon find the opportunity and the energy to be a hymn of trust for someone else, even as your heart laments from walking too near the shadow valley of death. May the deep hidden sigh of your neighbor become your own. May you provide unapologetic care for someone's body, or may you find a way to receive care for your own. May we all dwell in the house of she who is faithful for days without end. Amen.